Perfect weather for a flight out of Nice Côte d'Azur, don't you think? We're on runway 22 left, and we're cleared for takeoff. Taking off. An A320 obviously requires more speed and a longer runway than a single-engine prop plane. But luckily, we have some extra tools at our disposal to make the job a little easier once we're airborne. For starters, the autothrust manages engine power to maintain a target airspeed. Autopilot will keep us on track with navigation, and the fly-by-wire system lets us maintain a consistent attitude without needing to make constant adjustments. When I give the word, you're going to execute a straight-out takeoff. After you complete the initial climb, I'll take the controls. But first, check the MCDU for our reference speeds. I already typed in today's numbers. The rotation speed, VR, is 131 knots. I'll call out when we reach it. Take a look at the PFD now. Then, once we hit VR, you just need to begin a gentle rotation by pulling back on the side stick. Don't exceed 10 degrees until you've lifted off. Next, let's review the thrust levers. We need to be aware of 3 different detents. Use the climb detent labeled CL on your throttle to automatically manage the thrust for the remainder of the flight. Toga to take off at full power on short runways or when performing a go-around. And for today, FLX MCT for a reduced thrust takeoff. We reduce thrust at takeoff to preserve our engine life and save fuel. Now let's monitor the engine parameters. As you can see on the engine warning and system display, I applied the parking brakes earlier. Okay, we're ready to go. Apply half forward side stick. Then move both thrust levers gently forward to 50% N1. Then move them to the flex detent. Okay, now the auto thrust is armed. Use the rudder to keep us on the center line. 80. Rotate. Positive climb, gear up. Engage autopilot. Overspeed. Autopilot can either be engaged 5 seconds or 100 feet after takeoff to manage heading and altitude. The FMA is showing lever climb, which means we've reached thrust reduction altitude. Adjust the thrust levers to climb detent.
Overspeed.
Now we're in the climb detent. Auto thrust is active and will manage airspeed by adjusting the power. At S speed, retract flaps to 0. Disarm ground spoilers.
Overspeed.
That was excellent. for a visual landing approach into Nice Côte d'Azur. Auto thrust is going to handle power management, so our main objective is to control the pitch to stay on the glide slope. The beauty of fly-by-wire means you only need to use the stick when you want to make attitude adjustments. Alright, as long as auto thrust is on, the speed will be automatically managed. Throttles should stay in the climb detent. Just focus on the trajectory. Remember, fly-by-wire doesn't need a lot of corrective input. Just keep making small adjustments to pitch and roll as necessary. See the screw on the dash above the PFD? Use that as a guideline to keep us centered on the runway. For a visual approach, we have the track FPA mode activated. This will display the green velocity vector on your attitude indicator. Place it 3 degrees below the horizon to follow a 3-degree glide slope.
2,500.
To the right of the runway at the 4 colored lights called PAPI. They'll give feedback to stay within a 3-degree glide slope all the way down. If the PAPI shows 2 white lights and 2 reds, then we're on target. 4 white lights means we're too high, 4 red means we're too low. At 20 feet, pull back on the stick to kiss the runway, but be careful to avoid a tail strike. Threshold. Now shift your focus down to the end of the runway. Listen for the computer calling out retard, then set thrust to idle. Time to flare.
Right. 100. 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. 25.
10 Now it's time for something more wild and challenging than just a run-of-the-mill takeoff. Not all runways are long, flat, and clear of debris. Let's try taking to the sky from a more rugged surface. Keep holding the brakes. It's a little more difficult to keep straight during the takeoff roll on a loose surface such as gravel, as you lose some steering control. With the brakes applied, go ahead and increase power to full throttle. This runway is shorter than one you'd find at a larger airport, so we need to modify the takeoff technique to get off the ground and climb as quickly as possible. Go ahead and set full throttle. First, apply the brakes. Excellent. The engine instruments are all in the green. Now release the brakes and we'll get going. Go ahead and release the brakes. Rotate at 45 knots. Now smoothly raise the nose to 15 degrees. Now that we're safely off the ground, go ahead and retract the landing gear. Maintain a 15 degrees nose-up attitude to hold a climbing airspeed of 60 knots. Now retract the flaps to improve our climb rate. Great. Now keep on climbing straight ahead. Pull the nose up a little more for a good climb rate. Pretty good. Keep practicing and you'll nail short field takeoffs. Off from a gravel runway, let's try landing on one. For this short field landing, the terrain dictates that we need to approach at an angle. Start by deploying the landing gear and get ready for our approach. Short runways require an early touchdown and full flaps to minimize our rollout so we don't run out of runway. Next, fully extend the flaps. Great. Aim for an approach speed of 55 knots. So we have the longest roll possible, but be careful not to undershoot it. Cut the power just before touching down for a nice, smooth landing. Once we touch down, apply the brakes for a smooth landing that brings us to a stop as quickly as possible. Off from a gravel runway, let's try landing on one. For this short field landing, the terrain dictates that we need to approach at an angle. Start by deploying the landing gear and get ready for our approach. runway. Next, fully extend the flaps. Great. Aim for an approach speed of 55 knots. Aim close to the beginning of the runway so we have the longest roll possible, but be careful not to undershoot it. Cut the power just before touching down for a nice, smooth landing. Once we touch down, apply the brakes for a smooth landing that brings us to a stop as quickly as possible. Watch out! Now that you've taken off from a gravel runway, let's try landing on one. For this short field landing, the terrain dictates that we need to approach at an angle. Start by deploying the landing gear and get ready for our approach. Short runways require an early touchdown and full flaps to minimize our rollout so we don't run out of runway. Next, fully extend the flaps. Great. Aim for an approach speed of 55 knots. Aim close to the beginning of the runway so we have the longest roll possible, but be careful not to undershoot it. Cut the power just before touching down for a nice, smooth landing. Once we touch down, apply the brakes for a smooth landing that brings us to a stop as quickly as possible. The landing. The procedure is more challenging than at a larger airport, but being able to land on short and unimproved runways like this one opens up more possibilities for your adventures. Flying has its own set of hazards and requires its own set of specialized skills. Mountainous terrain, especially at high altitude, often creates dangerous turbulence, even when conditions appear dead calm. Fly on the right-hand side of the valley ahead, maintaining 2,000 feet altitude and 100 knots airspeed. Air flows over mountains like water does over rocks, conforming to the topography both on the upside and the downside. Air forced up the side of a mountain by wind creates updrafts, often unpredictable ones. Let's ride this wave of rising air and soar along these ridges like eagles. With the wind out of our left-hand side, fly just above the right side edge of the valley to ride the updraft. Now that we're flying alongside the valley wall, you'll start to feel the aircraft want to gain altitude. Maintaining altitude needs a slightly lower pitch attitude than usual, We're now ridge soaring like an eagle. Turbulence often comes with updrafts, so prepare for the going to get a little rough. Try to stay in the rising air to get a good feel for it. As we reach the gap in the mountain wall on our right side, the updraft will level off and then ramp up again when we reach the other side of the gap. Practice may be a good idea. How updrafts help with lift as you soar along a ridge. Aim for 2,000 feet, this time keeping over to the left side of the valley, putting us on the downwind side of the mountains. Keep heading along the valley. The opposite of an updraft is a downdraft, where air spills over a mountain or ridge and descends down this backside slope. Keep over to the left side and you'll feel how you need to fight to maintain altitude. Keep heading along the valley. You'll find it difficult to maintain altitude in a downdraft, so keep a high power setting and watch the altimeter and be ready to work the controls, especially the elevator. If it gets too much, make a gentle turn to the right towards the middle of the valley. This will take you out of the downdraft. Well done, but there's room for improvement. Now that you've experienced a downdraft, you'll know how to react the next time you encounter one while flying in the mountains. You'll encounter them on the downwind side of terrain, where winds blow at speeds of 10 knots and faster. The Icon A5 isn't limited to hard surfaces. We can experience the glorious Alaskan landscape all the more with our water-going capabilities. To get started, let's look at a basic water takeoff. It's much more difficult to accelerate when in water, so you want to get as much lift as possible as quickly as you can. To reduce our takeoff run, we'll use full flaps. Set the flaps to their fully extended position. Alright, we have the water rudder retracted and the gear is up. Now give it full throttle to get us moving. Use the rudder to aim for the gap between the island up ahead and the shoreline. Keep full power set. Lift the nose just a little at 50 knots to get airborne. That's it. Now reduce the flaps to 15 degrees. Now we can retract the flaps completely. Good. Keep us climbing straight ahead, aiming for about 60 knots to get the best climb rate. I think a bit more practice may be a good idea. Bush flying brings a number of great do-anything, go-anywhere possibilities. We're going to land on the lake up ahead, so let's start getting ready. Bring the throttle all the way back to idle. Let the speed drop below 75 knots, right where the white band on the airspeed indicator begins. Great. Now extend the first stage of flaps. Flaps 15 degrees. Now fully extend the flaps to 30 degrees. Great. Now keep the power low and aim for 50 to 60 knots. A little movement of the water is helpful, as super calm conditions make it harder to judge our height. Now we simply come in a lot like a runway landing, keeping our speed nice and low and touching down with minimum descent rate. Aim for a nice smooth touchdown in the center of the lake. Add some power so you don't get too slow. Add some power so you don't get too slow. Once on the water, the aircraft will slow hydrodynamically. Fully retract the flaps to reduce our lift, helping us to slow down more quickly. Fantastic. Water landings open up a ton of new possibilities. Next, we'll put all that you've learned to the test with the bush flying challenge. Now that we've been through the basics, let's put your bush flying skills to the test. We're going to take a short trip through the mountains to Dogfish Bay. Get set up for a water takeoff. Great. Now get us airborne. Bring in the flaps and keep us climbing to an altitude of 1,500 feet. Maintain an altitude of 1,500 feet and head over to the valley up ahead. Turn to the right here and maneuver through the valley. The wind is now coming from our left, so decide which side of the valley to fly over to avoid downdrafts. Chosen the updraft side of the valley. allowing you to soar along the ridge. Dogfish Bay is just ahead. When bush flying, it is always wise to do a flyover of the landing site first to check the conditions of the strip. Start a gradual descent, and we'll fly past the runway to take a look. Runway looks good to me. Reduce speed to under 75 knots and descend to under 1,000 feet to prepare for approach. Take the first stage of flaps. Flaps 15 degrees. This landing will be on a short grass runway. Lower the landing gear. Finally, take full flaps and perform a short field landing. Well done. Now you can proceed with confidence in your new abilities. With these newly acquired skills, you can explore some of the globe's most remote, little-seen corners. We're flying over the UK's Shetland Islands, just below a thick layer of clouds. Up until now, you've been able to look outside to judge the aircraft's attitude and location. What happens when you lose that outside view? That takes us into the world of instrument flight. When you can't use the horizon for reference due to clouds, darkness, or other hindrances to visibility, you'll need to rely on your airplane's instruments. When flying on instruments alone, you'll need to rely on your attitude indicator to see your pitch and roll information. Modern cockpits like this combine several instruments into one electronic display called a primary flight display, or PFD. Stay on heading 270, set full power, and climb up to 4,500 feet. Set full power for the climb. Watch your speed. You need to work on your speed control. Up into the cloud layer, notice how you're starting to lose your outside view. Instead of looking out the canopy, focus your attention on the cockpit instruments. You can maintain wings level using the attitude indicator. Continue climbing to 4,500 feet. Vertical speed indicator and the altimeter, level off at 4,500 feet while continuing to maintain a heading of 270. Now fly straight and level at 4,500 feet, getting used to not having an outside horizon for reference. this heading and take us down to 4,000 feet. Reduce power so that we can descend without gaining speed. Increase power again for cruise and keep us at 4,000 feet. Watch your speed. You need to work on your speed control. Room for improvement. Tried some climbs and descents, we'll introduce turning. Throughout this lesson, maintain your current altitude of 4,000 feet. Our heading is the direction our nose is pointing, measured in degrees. The main electronic display in front of you is the primary flight display, or PFD. At the bottom center of the PFD, we see the horizontal situation indicator, or the HSI. The HSI shows us the direction our nose is pointing, called our heading. Headings are measured in degrees, with east being 090, south 180, west 270, and north 360. Currently, we're heading west. That's 270 degrees. When turning, we want to aim for a bank angle of around 20 degrees. Along the top of the attitude indicator are white lines. Each line represents 10 degrees. Normally, we use about 20 degrees of bank, which is the second white line. Let's try it out. Make a turn to the left onto heading 180 using 20 degrees of bank. You didn't maintain 4,000 feet while turning. Watch your altitude. Maintain 4,000 feet. Keep turning until heading south, at which point smoothly roll back to wings level. That's it. Stop turning there and you'll be heading due south, heading 180. That's it. Stop turning there and you'll be heading due south, heading 180. Great. Now try and maintain this heading for a short while. That's it. Stop turning there and you'll be heading due south, heading 180. Now make a turn to the right onto a heading of 350. onto a heading of 350. Now maintain heading 350 for a bit. I think a bit more practice may be a good idea. We're cruising at 100 knots, maintaining our heading and altitude. Let's look at how we deal with speed changes when flying on instruments. When slowing down, the wings produce less lift. To counter this, you'll need to progressively raise the nose in order to maintain altitude. Give it a try. Reduce power and bring the speed back to 70 knots. Watch your speed. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. Remember to adjust the elevator trim so that you don't have to keep putting any pressure on the controls. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. Keep us steady on heading 350. You need to be able to control altitude while adjusting speed. Keep us steady on heading 350. You wandered off the heading. Keep us steady on heading 350. Now set power to maintain 70 knots. Notice how the nose needs to be a little higher than before to make up for the loss of airspeed. Use the elevator trim to adjust pitch to the new speed and maintain 70 knots for a bit. Now increase power to get your speed back up to 100 knots. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. As we speed up, notice how you need to trim nose down to avoid climbing. You need to be able to control altitude while adjusting speed. That's it. Now stabilize at 100 knots. Good. Now we'll take flap settings into account. Flaps give a boost in lift, which you'll need to control in order to maintain our altitude. They also add drag, making us slow down more quickly, so be careful not to get too slow. Reduce power and slow us down to 60 knots. Watch your speed. Keep us precisely at 100 knots. You need to maintain 100 knots. Keep us steady on heading 350. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. You need to be able to control altitude while adjusting speed. Good. Now extend the flaps to 10 degrees. Now set flaps at 20 degrees. With the extra drag, start adding power so you don't drop below your target airspeed of 60 knots. Keep us steady on heading 350. Now stabilize at 60 knots and trim for level flight. Keep us precisely at 60 knots. You did well, but you can do better. Have the basics of flying the aircraft on instruments, let's look at navigation. There is a worldwide network of radio beacons that pilots use to find their way when flying IFR. The most common beacon is the VOR. I've tuned the Sumberg VOR into your nav radio, which we're going to fly toward. To get there, we'll use the Course Deviation Indicator, CDI. That's the green arrow and bar on the HSI. I've set the CDI for a course of 170. That means we want to arrive at the VOR on a heading of 170. The CDI shows us if we are on our selected course. If the bar is to the left of center, we need to fly to the left to recapture our course. The bar is currently over to the right, so keep flying on this heading and wait for the CDI bar to start moving towards the middle. You were way off on altitude holding. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. Keep us on heading 240 for now. Onto heading 170. 170 for a couple miles. Practice may be a good idea. Focus on non-directional beacons, or NDB. The NDB is tuned on the automatic direction finding ADF radio and is shown as a blue needle on the HSI. As Sumburg NDB is tuned, the needle is pointing straight towards it, which is to our right. Maintain 4,000 feet and heading 180 and watch what the needle does. Stick to heading 180 for now. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. You went too far off our desired heading. You didn't hold your altitude accurately enough. Notice how the needle always points directly towards the NDB. As we continue to fly south, the needle moves farther toward the bottom of the HSI. The needle will move whenever we are not traveling directly to or from the NDB. Make a turn to the right, towards the NDB needle. Towards the blue NDB arrow on the HSI. We're getting close. An NDB needle becomes more sensitive as we get nearer, but resist the urge to make any large corrections. Try to maintain 4,000 feet altitude. You didn't hold your altitude accurately enough. Now see how the needle spins around and points behind us. I think a bit more practice may be a good idea. about the basics of flying on instruments. Now we need to get back on the ground. The most common landing aid is the Instrument Landing System, or ILS for short. An ILS uses two directional radio signals, one for lateral guidance called a localizer, and the other for vertical guidance called the glide slope. The localizer provides lateral guidance, which directs you onto the runway centerline. The glide slope provides the intended descent angle onto the runway. The localizer is displayed with a CDI, much like in the VOR lesson. Keep flying on a heading of 210 at 1,500 feet, and we'll watch for the localizer to come alive. The localizer is moving now. Make a gentle turn to the right, intercepting the localizer and keeping the CDI in the middle. Try to maintain 1,500 feet until we intercept the glide slope. Good. Now keep the localizer bar centered and maintain 1,500 feet. The glide slope is displayed next to the altimeter on your PFD. If the green glide slope diamond is above center, you are below the glide path. We always start out below the glide slope, as we want to intercept the localizer first. We'll wait for the glide slope to start moving. The localizer is starting to get away. Turn towards it to stay on course. We got too far off the localizer. Try to maintain 1,500 feet until we intercept the glide slope. You needed to stay at 1,500 feet until reaching the glide slope. Here comes the glide slope. Maintain 1,500 feet until it almost reaches the center. Here it comes. Now reduce power a little and start to descend, using the VSI to aim for 500 feet per minute. Keep both the localizer and glide slope indications centered all the way down to the ground. Reduce speed and set flaps as needed as you make your way down the ILS. The glide slope is starting to drift away from center. You didn't follow the glide slope accurately enough. Approaching the runway. This approach has an offset, meaning that the localizer and runway aren't lined up together exactly. Focus on following the ILS for now. We'll transition to a visual landing once we're closer to touchdown. Make only small corrections and remember that each will be more critical as we approach touchdown. The glide slope is starting to drift away from center. You didn't follow the glide slope accurately enough. Great. Now is a good time to transition from flying on instruments to using visual cues to complete the landing. Get us down onto the runway and then come to a smooth stop. practice may be a good idea. Into practice. We're at 5,000 feet following a GPS route towards Sunberg. I'll ask you to perform some handling tasks to test your IFR flying skills. Follow the GPS as shown in magenta on your CDI, maintaining 5,000 feet and 110 knots. Watch the altitude. We want 5,000 feet. You need it to keep us at 5,000 feet. Okay, still maintaining the GPS course. Take us down to 3,500 feet, keeping 110 knots airspeed. Watch your speed. We want 110 knots. Next, keep us at 3,500 feet and make a left turn onto heading 060. Keep us at 3,500 feet. You didn't hold your altitude accurately enough. Let's throw some other things your way. Please bring the speed back to 70 knots. Keep us at 3,500 feet. You didn't hold your altitude accurately enough. All right, Great. Now keep us at 3,500 feet, 70 knots, and turn us to the right onto heading 225. Keep us at 3,500 feet. Okay, now get us back to 110 knots. I think a bit more practice may be a good idea.
Victor, Uniform Oscar, traffic. Victor Uniform Oscar, traffic Cessna Foxtrot, Mike 15 Echo, taking off runway 8 East departure. Approach Cessna Foxtrot Mike 15 Echo is type Cessna Skyhawk 2 miles east of Kilo Victor Uniform Oscar 500 feet. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace.
Cessna Foxtrot Mike 15 Echo Portland approach. Squawk 6727.
Squawk 6727 Cessna 15 Echo.
Cessna 15 Echo radar contact 2 miles southeast of Kilo Victor Uniform Oscar 1,100 feet. Cleared through the Charlie airspace. Maintain on navigation.
Cleared through the Charlie airspace, Cessna 15 Echo.
Cessna 15 Echo, contact approach on 119.0. Good day.
Going to 119.0 Cessna 15 Echo. Approach Cessna Foxtrot, Mike 15 Echo 1,200 feet.
Cessna Foxtrot Mike 15 Echo, approach altimeter 30.07 radar contact, continue. on 118.1. Good day.
Going to 118.1 Cessna 15 Echo. Portland approach Cessna Foxtrot, Mike 15 Echo, 3,900 feet.
Cessna Foxtrot Mike 15 Echo Portland approach altimeter 30.06 radar contact continue.